The part of speech we're going to cover today is verbs. So let's look at what are verbs. Verbs are doing or being words, and they are words that we use in a sentence to express either an action or a state of being or condition. Okay, so verbs can do two things. They can either express an action or they can tell us about the state of being or condition of the subject of the sentence. So examples of verbs that you would know, and we're looking at action verbs now. Words like run, dive, play, dance, and clap, those are all action verbs. And verbs that tell us something about the state of being or the condition of our subject would be verbs like was. For instance, the boy was sad. Or in this case, Ria looks tired. That tells us something about Ria's condition. The giraffe is tall. It tells us again something about the giraffe's state of being or condition. And that perfume smells nice. So all of these verbs here, was, looks, is, smells, they're all verbs that we're using to tell us something about the condition of our subject. So now that we've looked at verbs, let's do a small exercise and see if you can identify the verbs in this sentence. Let's look at the first sentence. The girl rides her bicycle. Can you find which word in that sentence is a verb? Well, again, remember, parts of speech, as we learned before, are words that perform a particular job in the sentence. So we've got to find the word in the sentence that tells us something about an action or state of being. And right now in this sentence, if you selected the word rides, then you're correct. And this happens to be a word that's telling us about an action. The next sentence, James laughs loudly. Can you identify the verb in that sentence? If you said laughs, then you're correct. And again, this is a verb that we're using to express an action. Third sentence, my mother is asleep. Can you identify the verb in that sentence? If you said is, then you're correct. And in this case, this verb is being used to tell us something about the condition of the subject, my mother's state of being. She is asleep. The next sentence, I took the test already. Can you identify the verb in that sentence? Okay, that's correct. The verb is took, and that's an action verb. And finally, we went to the movies on Friday. Can you identify the verb in that sentence? And if you said went, then you're also correct. This is a verb that is something about an action that took place. We can classify verbs in two types, transitive verbs and intransitive verbs. Transitive verbs have an object which receives the action. What this means is that the subject performs the action on the object or the object receives the action. Let's look at an example. The boy ate an apple. In this sentence, we have identified the verb, which is the word ate. So the subject performs this action, ate, but he performs it on an object, which in this case is an apple. So if we ask the question, ate what? The answer is an apple. So the verb ate is a transitive verb. Let's look at another sentence. I spent the money. Again, let's look at the verb. The verb we've identified is the word spent. We can ask the question, what did you spend? And if you answer, I spent the money, then you can see it's a transitive verb because there's an object, the money, which received the action, spend. And our final sentence, we played games last night. Again, the verb in the sentence is the word played. You can ask yourself a question, played what? And if there's an answer to that question, and there is an answer, we played games. So then you see that the verb played here is a transitive verb because we have an object that receives the action. Or in other words, the action is performed on the object. So I hope you understand that. Let's move on and look at intransitive verbs. Intransitive verbs have no object which receives their action. So if you compare the two types of verbs, with a transitive verb, that verb performs an action on the object of the sentence. With an intransitive verb, the sentence has no object. So there is no object which receives the action of the verb. And it might be that that verb does not act upon an object, or it might be that that verb doesn't act upon an object in that sentence. So let's look at some examples so you'll see what I mean. The first sentence, they laughed. So the verb laughed in the sentence, you see there's no object in that sentence, so it's an intransitive verb. And if you think about that word laughed, laughed does not act upon any object, does it? If you ask the question, laughed what? Then you will see that there's no answer to that question. So laughed is an intransitive verb. Let's look at another sentence. The boy ate quickly. If you ask the question, ate what? Based on this sentence, there's no answer. So the verb ate in this sentence is not acting upon an object, so it's an intransitive verb. Let's look at another sentence. I spent wisely. Again, we'll ask ourselves, spent what? There's no answer to that question, so the verb spent in this sentence is an intransitive verb. And the final sentence, we played last night. Again, you can ask, played what? And since there's no answer to that for this sentence, the verb played is an intransitive verb in that sentence because it does not act upon an object. So I hope you saw in the first sentence, that's a verb that generally doesn't act upon any object, so it's an intransitive verb. But you have some verbs that can be transitive or intransitive. So you have to look at the sentence to determine whether the verb is transitive or intransitive. Okay, so to go over what we've done so far on verbs, we know that a verb is used in a sentence to tell us what the subject is doing or something about their state of being or condition. And we looked at transitive verbs, which are verbs that act upon the object of a sentence. For example, the man took an apple. And we also looked at intransitive verbs, which are verbs that have no object receiving the action. So an example of an intransitive verb might be the sun set yesterday. There are additional topics on verbs that we will cover in later tutorials. Things like subject-verb agreement, where we learn that the verb you use in a sentence must agree with the sentence subject in number. We'll also look at tenses. Tenses tell us when the action took place or when the condition or state of being existed. And we also look at voice, and voice tells us whether the action is performed by the subject or performed on the subject. So I hope you understood this tutorial on verbs and that you are now able to identify verbs in a sentence. You can practice questions using our English for 11 Plus program. Just click on the section on parts of speech and you will get similar questions on verbs. You can try demo questions on our website at my11plus.com. Just look for the section that says try the software. You can find us online using My11Plus to find us either on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. I thank you for your attention and hope that this video was very helpful for you in learning about verbs.